In the Tunnel is a 1971 short story by the Canadian author Mavis Gallant. Gallant was born in Montreal in 1922, and although she was brought up in a broadly English-speaking community, her father was British, she was strongly influenced by French Quebec. She became bilingual at an early age, and when she went to work for the Montreal Standard in 1944, that was one of her assets. I knew Quebec to the core, she wrote later, and I could interview French Canadians without dragging them into English, a terrain of wariness. She decided she didn't want to be a career journalist, so in 1950 she moved to Paris to try and make a living from writing fiction. I had no friends, no connections, and no possibility of finding employment should it be necessary, she wrote 46 years later. That I might not survive at all never entered my head. She dispatched a story to the New Yorker, and they replied encouragingly. Thus began an exceptionally fruitful relationship which only ended with Gallant's death in 2014 in Paris at the age of 91. In 1996, Random House brought out a significant selection of our stories, 52 in all, which was republished under the Everyman imprint in 2016. In the Tunnel is the 22nd story in that collection. It's about a young Canadian woman called Sarah, whose widower father worries about the course her life is taking. She's having an affair with a married professor when the narrative begins. The father pays off the man and sends Sarah to Grenoble to learn about French civilization. She quickly becomes bored. She finds the Alps shabby and the cultural life of France morbid and stifling, and she relocates to the Riviera. However, she encounters roughly the same problems. She's still in France, after all, until she meets an expatriate Englishman several years her senior called Roy, who's been admiring her from afar. The two fall in love, and she moves into his villa, of which the Tunnel, a long, dark, enclosed walkway, is a part. Roy has assured her that he has no secrets, and he wants to introduce her to all his friends. He isn't lying. He only has two friends, the Reeveses, an elderly couple, English expatriates like himself, who live next door and from whom he rents the villa. The Reeveses are bohemians of the unpleasant variety, and as it gradually turns out, Roy isn't dissimilar. The author's skill lies in the fact that the reader doesn't really know what's happened to Sarah until the story's almost over, and there's no sense that Sarah herself ever knows. Roy and the Reeveses have essentially been infantilized. What is your walk of life? Sarah asks Mrs. Reeves sarcastically at one point, provoking a word or two that Sarah was unable to lip read. The irony is that the Reeveses and Roy keep insinuating that Sarah simply isn't mature enough for him, by which they mean old enough. In other words, this is a story about the link between aging and maturing. There's a sense in which material privilege, living abroad and apart, a fixed sense of one's own superiority, national or otherwise, plus an independence from the world of work, can make a person puerile. The Reeveses are what used to be called ghastly, but their exhibitionist nonconformity blinds them to that. Aging only goes forward, but perhaps maturity can travel in both directions. However, it's to Gallant's credit that she doesn't make that the last word, though none of it's even vaguely explicit. She also, in the end, makes the reader feel sorry for the Reeveses. Roy's a different matter. His immaturity may be pathological. Is he to be pitied, or despised, or both? You decide. There's a brief meditation on subjectivity and objectivity at the beginning of the story, which may be more significant than it appears, because In the Tunnel is open to several radically different interpretations. I can imagine someone someday making it into a film in which the Reeveses are time-ravaged heroes of existentialist rage, Roy's a tortured Nietzschean Superman, and Sarah's a banal ingenue. As I've just said, you decide.